he launches Alameda Research first, which is just like this trading firm, which basically the idea here is we have some ideas. We're going to raise a little bit of money, and we're going to now I can just send you $100K. It's going to take me 5 minutes.
So that's why when people like kidnap people's data and things along those lines, they'd like to get paid.
I just wasn't interested. I was like, that's not my life. So I always wanted to sort of, have a voice. And so I started a YouTube channel just doing random videos. Washington. And I think there was like a tweet from Sam saying like, oh, like I'll see you the next time you're in Washington or something like that. But like it was kind of a dig because he knows CZ can't go to Washington. Like he would be. So if you default on that loan, I'm out $1 million. Another way is I ask for, okay, I'll take some equity in the studio if something goes wrong, right? So I cover my butt if you default on it. Now, if you're some criminal, laundering money has just never been easier. Instead of taking $100,000 across the border or wiring it where it can get held up by a bank.
Did you interview him before the scandal?
No, not before the scandal.
So it's like as it was going down.
As it was going down, he goes on all these Twitter spaces. He doesn't want to – he's doing interviews with that lack of regulation and the ability to send peer-to-peer, which means like you and I can just send money to each other directly, no middleman. There's also a really huge opportunity for fraud, scams. Might be one of the first like trillionaires or whatever. Like he's such a great entrepreneur. They think he's such a genius. It might have been one of the A1Z guys.
Gotten away with it?
So many of these scams are like these issues of either regulators not having time, not having the resources. He said, well, hey, can we restructure all this money that went through me like a loan so that we can, say that I took a loan out and I was donating so we didn't violate any laws. They never ended up doing that. This is what was going on in crypto. They're called collateralized loans. But what FTX was doing was they were saying, hey, like, we'll take $1 million from you, but instead of giving you on your dollars or whatever, euros or whatever, and you put it into this crypto exchange, they have a bank, and they work with that bank, then they exchange, and then you'll launch your own token that people can invest in, sort of like they're investing almost in your crypto exchange. And so that was actually one of the ways that FTX abilities, it's hard to know. So people really just take you at face value, and they have to trust that, like, oh, other people are invested, so I guess I'll jump in too.
And that's
tease for a while. But like, so I eventually like pivoted into this crypto direction and learned all about that. But it started just from a curiosity about scammers, and I wanted somebody to say, appreciate your transparency, kind of kissing up a little bit. But I was just like, somebody has to ask him some real questions. So I had 2 prior little Twitter space interactions with him, and he kept getting away with the fact that you think you have this backstop because on the books it's worth, X dollars. Let's say it's like worth $5 a coin. But what you're not realizing is the real risk is when FTX can't pay you back, they probably can't pay anyone back. Just kind of grifting here. And so, but you'd see him in nice cars. And so I was like, what am I looking at? And then as I'm doing my YouTube show, I'm like, I get fed a bunch of cars and I'd go because it was like my friends like said, hey, we have to get somebody, you want to go? And I was like, sure, I'll go. I was like kind of fascinated. And you'd see these guys, So by the 3rd interview, I'd studied him and I said, okay, how do we get down to FTX's responsibility in this whole thing? And I kept coming back to it was the terms of.
And then when you have him on, there's a lot of I wasn't aware. I'm not sure. I'm not aware of that. I don't know. There was all this hemming and
person in the space to where people thought, okay, well, if he's saying it, he's a guy who only says positive things about crypto because he's a crypto executive. So if he's saying there might be problems, there's probably some problems. But like, it was very clear the internal conversations were they knew they were committing fraud. They knew they were doing things wrong. And this idea was, well, no one's going to catch us, right? Nobody's
go back to making money again.
I don't think he thought he would repay everyone, but everyone thought like, oh, we'll just enter Chapter 11 bankruptcy. We'll restructure the company. We'll reopen. We'll just turn all the debt into new. So this is funny. They found his League of Legends account, and during some of the calls after it was a fraud, you could hear him clicking in the background. Click, 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 click. He's playing League. When you withdraw, there's nothing tying your Ethereum to your particular address to like this random external address because you send it to a different one. we don't know. I mean, there's only a few that are bigger. Like there's Binance, very opaque company. We don't exactly know.
And what has happened to Binance since FTX went? What was the first video?
I started as sort of like an interview show, nothing about scams. I had a channel before it.
On and a lot of ums and ahs, and you just kept on him. It was amazing that first of all, it was amazing that he felt like he could do.
And that's ultimately what he was doing. But it also looks like he was donating through some of his executives. And, I mean, the whole thing was shady all the way down. Like they tracked his account. He's playing League while on calls about the failure of FTX.
Wow.
Just imagine the arrogance.
Is that arrogance? Do something like that. Like, why would he publicly communicate?
This is why it's so interesting to me to look at fraud. Like, this is why it fascinates me, as well as I think it's an important thing. I mean, so it's like things are good for now. Yeah.
You don't know.
That was the problem with the FTX. Like, they had hidden all their numbers. Like, Sam had, and it just was kind of, I was just trying to find my way. I was just trying to, like, even before that, I had done a show where I was, like, trying to break down these topics. I was like,
Binance hasn't had similar problems.
No, they've had a few runs, and they've covered withdrawals. I mean, so it's just, the problem is a lot of it's a black box. But even Western Union has been they've been getting kind of pinched a little bit, like, hey, you guys got to stop allowing all of this. But in crypto, because there's no more system to where they could see you, Joe, deposit a Bitcoin on FTX, they could grab that Bitcoin and start trading with it immediately.
Wow.
Even though they were never supposed to be able to. Coinbase, it seems like they're, legitimate, but so much of the problem with crypto is we don't know how much of this stuff is money laundering. We don't know how much of this stuff is like.
What is it's a crypto exchange, right? So how does that work?
So the first question is when you learn about crypto
Party.
That's right, but
also to the Republicans.
This is what's wild. So
yeah,
Sam knew publicly in our current American climate, like not having sort of like it's maybe not big enough. They're good people, a lot of the people going after these guys, but it's like trying to catch everyone who's speeding.
Inevitable.
It is inevitable. So something to understand. FTX was insolvent long before it was realized that they were insolvent. Right? So that's ultimately going to find out what we're doing here.
How many more of these are out there in the world?
As big as FTX, so he called it Fiat at FTX. But it was a $10 billion hole.
What do you mean by mislabeled?
Well, it was on a spreadsheet, Joe. So he was put it on a spreadsheet for their balance sheet, and he mislaid $10 million or your data's lost forever. And you're like, call the police, and you go, hey, track this guy. And they're like, to what? To a Bitcoin wallet? You can know their assets. So it's like a big thing recently in crypto. They'll say, hey, we're going to show you proof of reserves. What does that mean? They mean we'll show you on chain all our
and sell off all his tokens. Would they be still solvent today or still in operation today? Would they not crash, or was this an
shocking thing? And I think that shows, like, if you're running a shady empire, like, who's better than a shady lawyer to try to help you cover it up, right?
How did you get in?
All the crypto people were trying to control regulations to favor their individual business situation. And so CZ felt like he was being cut out in Washington. Fact that this guy, he got away with lying so long and perpetuating this image of himself as this generous billionaire. He's sort of the next Warren Buffett. That when everything goes wrong, put like let's say I have Ethereum, one Ether into this mixer, right? This pool of money. A bunch of people are putting one Ethereum into the CZ says, hey, maybe they don't have the money. I don't know, whatever. I'm just going to sell like $2 billion worth.
But he knew what he was doing.
Oh, for sure. He's a shark. This stuff went down, and a report comes out from CoinDesk where it shows FTX's balance sheet. It shows actually what tokens they have. For one of the first times, it was kind of
crypto.
Ransomware. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. 100%. Because before, it was like, okay, you need to use like Western Union or sort of one of these like these places where you can kind of send money without too much scrutiny. I too am safe because Tom Brady's got his money there, so I can put my money.
So is the lure is like how Bitcoin used to be worth very little, and then one time it was with the high of Bitcoin.
So he decides to donate dark to a Republican, like to Republicans, and part of the accusation is he knowingly did this through one of his, the son of Harvard lawyers. We just sort of can't lose. And nobody paid attention to some of the red flags that were going on until ultimately it was too late. It turns out he was So I decided to start pursuing it step by step. And at first it was like just me discovering like, well, what is this? Well, how does this scheme work? Okay, so I buy this course and then what? These exchanges where it was worth more. So he was arbitraging this difference in prices. And then after he made his money that way, I started hearing about these tokens. And they're like, hey, selling courses, like it's always the new grift. You always have to find, because people figure it out. Like they go like, oh, that actually doesn't work. Like, hey, drop shipping is A1Z, A16Z. It was one of those, Sequoia or A16Z. One of them wrote this glowing review of Sam, basically saying he's going to be one of the first trillionaires. So all of them wanted to basically influence politics by just donating. And the idea is you donate to both sides, you can never lose, right?
Yeah.
If you have
Initially, he thought he was going to be able to figure out a way to pull all the company's assets together and
I think
make everybody sound and repay everyone. And
act that bill. And now that it was all a fraud, or the guy who basically pushed it was a fraud, now they're like trying to retool it. I have 2 employees, and both of them are overseas. Like one of them's in London, one of them's in Ukraine. And so for me, I have to pay them, and I have to do her and I believe Gary Wang were big executives. They're cooperating. They pled guilty. They're cooperating with the feds. I mean, they did this, and that video has aged so well because it's like people are like, oh, it was all true. But people were outright calling it a fraud. Like Mark Cohodes, he's a famous short seller. He was, you know what I mean?
Right.
It's like people get away with it. It's just there's too many people doing it. And you'll catch some people, but ultimately a lot of people will just basically skate by, even though by all rights they should have been.
Jamie's looking it up.
I thought I knew it off the top of my head, and now I don't want to say the wrong one. A16Z.
A16. He lost it on the platform. He says the 18 million was on FTX or whatever, and he never got $1 out of it. But that was what the deal was for, like investment funds. They invested in a bunch of NFT projects. Mark Andreessen, I think, is the guy who runs it. Is a Matt Levine interview with Sam Bankman-Fried. He didn't call him a fraud outright, but he's like, hey, it seems like you're in the Ponzi business, and business is good.
Whoa. And what did he say to that?
Regulation for, I guess, offshore crypto exchanges, right?
And so these campaign finance, these violations.
Actually, his whole technique of shifting the blame like onto Alameda and like, I don't control Alameda. I've seen something very similar. I'm investigating this Ponzi scheme that's offshore. And so now it's trying to be sorted out by the guy who literally unraveled Enron. And he says, this lawyer goes, it's worse than Enron. The money system has to be safe. Like your grandma has to be able to charge back her credit card when there's a fraudster, right? Like, or this whole thing doesn't work. You can't rely on people being technically savvy in order to middleman, because there's no one who controls like Bitcoin. Like no one can say like no to a transaction. Now it's like there's nothing to stop you from sending that money. And then senator's office reached out to me. They're like, what do you think about this? And I was like, I don't know, man. You guys have to, this is y'all's thing to figure out. Ultimately, he'd be afraid of being indicted, or I don't really understand why he can't go, but he can't go to America. So Sam was meeting with regulators. CZ felt cut out, like he was basically going to get a bad deal. Fight, like one of the best ways to fight crime is at their wallets, like take away their banking. And crypto has just really revitalized that, because handle now is they're finding a bunch of campaign finance violations because he was trying to influence politics, U.S. politics. I mean, it's insane how deep will fall for something doesn't mean you're safe. Like you have to do I hate to say do your own research because that's such an overused, like, scammy phrase. It's actually such like a phrase like that, it's almost used. And it's like, well, what's fungibility mean? It means whether you were a guy withdrawing who is this degenerate day trader, really taking that. I mean, maybe some of them were taking it seriously, but not enough.
So if FTX didn't encourage regulation and CZ didn't get upset at that.
That's the issue was FTX's problem was not CZ. Ultimately, he's kind of the guy who like pushed over the House made gay. So like, can you do this?
So someone had to be gay to do it? Like,
no, basically they were like, we need someone trustworthy we can trust to do this. So, hey, you're going to be the guy. Like we literally had a $10 billion account that he mislabeled with Alameda Research.
Mislabeled?
Yeah, it's a strange time, man, to be covering crypto because I tried to tell people for years that this scam problem, this fraud problem, because every day it's getting less valuable. So the question is, what do you do if you're in that country making money? If you want a guy who enabled God or who helped cover up God mode, and he's like, well, I don't want to comment on other people, or it's just like,
well, how does he skate on that? Like, how?
It wasn't like he was some random fly-by-night guy. He was well respected in the Wall Street space. People thought he might take over the SEC after like the current person had stepped down. They thought he was going to take it over, like companies. So they have to report everything. So if you're offshore, you can kind of not do any of that. You can play fast and loose. And, for some people, they think that's better. They can offer, let's say, like 100x leverage. Wire transfer, and it's kind of expensive to do these. Like you pay all these fees for wire transfers. So the idea is like, okay, well, if you have crypto, those wire fees can go down. And instead of taking, maybe a day or something, it'll take like, I'm this guy who's going to maximize good in the world, and that was his reason for working all the time. I mean, that's the justification to be hopped up on amphetamines. It's like maximize productivity, maximize human happiness. At the end, when you're like ready for this thing to go down, because I know as soon as I get on, it's going to end pretty quickly after. I said, let me ask him some real hard questions. Because all these guys are like, Sam, he's a shark. He knows what he's doing.
What was the conflict between the two of them that led him to do that?
The conflict was, it's a great question. The conflict was ultimately that Sam was trying to get some regulations passed, and I used to play like a variant of League, so I know it's fun, but it's not like fun to the point. Look, this guy's whole thing was like, I'm this effective altruist of was going on. Now he's still like trying to say he did nothing wrong. He maintains he's innocent. And right now, actually, the big, like, kind of scam, they've recently been shut down. But the idea was...
Just the idea of putting your money into Tornado Cash.
Yeah, it's wild.
Is there a better...
Or, something like Europe or something like that is you are subject to all these regulations which require you to be a little more careful.
Oh, those are pesky.
Yeah, they're fine. And then FTX US went bankrupt. And he's the one who put it into bankruptcy. And then he's telling everyone, oh, no, the money's actually still there. I mean, he was constantly giving a conflicting narrative. It's kind of like, okay, it's a little bit chic to be donating to Democrats. You can do that without too much, negative press. But if I'm the number 3 donor to the Republican Party, that's going to be a bad look. Actually, campaign finance laws, I've heard, are pretty weak. I forget the name of the law, but it was passed in like the early 2000s, 2010s maybe, where it actually became very easy to donate, to store your money somewhere else. How do you store it? So there's this idea of like these alternative currencies that are kind of interesting. And then there's some arguments that like, hey, if you're someone like me, right, people in charge who are going to take the fall, you resign, and then you blame it on them later when everything goes wrong. His problem, though, is Caroline Ellison flipped on him.
So she definitely flipped on him.
She was smart. Yeah. She cooperated and go start trading with it. Unless, obviously we have FDIC insurance, stuff like that. But like they didn't have that. They just take your money, go trade with it, and that's where the disaster started. These guys basically, a lot of these people backed Sam with the highest endorsements. And so if you're just an average person, you're thinking, well, how much more due diligence can I do than all these other guys?
It's amazing that things with this amount of money can get this far sideways before anyone knows what's going on.
This is the problem with offshore offshore accounts and stuff.
Easier or more profitable for him.
Mm-hmm.
Like, why would he do that?
I'm not as familiar with the regulation side of things. People were talking about that a lot. Elizabeth Warren wrote a letter to them. They're being looked at much more closely. I mean, ultimately, all of these things are so opaque in the sense that success, 2 months, you're going to be making 5 figures a month, 10 months, maybe 6 figures a month. And I've done it for people before. That's the social proof. I've shown people how to do this. With regulators, they were all Sam was working really closely with regulators to try to get regulations passed, and CZ felt like he was cut out, so that stirred up this like battle between them, and ultimately, it's like sort of what's left after the guy who kind of was spearheading this bill like was a fraud. It's kind of tough. I was actually randomly but ultimately the outcome of that is like, yeah, I encrypt all your data. Joe, send me. I know you're this successful podcaster. I want you to send me. Really going to sell most of our FTT that we got from that deal, and we're going to sell it. We don't know what's going on there, and all of a sudden it starts this firestorm because people are like,
why the celebrities are important, and that's why
huge part of it.
The connection to BlackRock is important.
Huge part, yes, because they're the legitimacy that says, hey, I'm, a lot of people found out about crypto the same time the mainstream media, everyone else did. So by the time they're actually investing,
it's too late.
It's too late. I think the most fair case you could make about some reactions, but not much. What I noticed is it resonated with people beyond the views, if that makes sense. Mm-hmm. I was just like, there was something different about the reaction to it. Vickley, Sam goes, "Oh, you won our battle," and people were like, is it a battle when you lose billions of dollars of customers? All these other wallets that it's impossible to know which of those new wallets my dollar's from. It's just crazy. It's a crazy idea. We're just going to do a few transactions through your name. That just came out in a press release. It's the new charges. He was basically they call them straw donors because it's like, if I give money to you to give, I used to be just like you, Joe, but then, I found out that doing Amazon drop shipping is the way to make millions of dollars. And, I used to fail, but by these little tricks, I, caught. In my view, what he did was criminal. That's why I started. But it hasn't been prosecuted or anything like that. But he's on a leaked private call. Everyone can go listen to it yourself. It's just this. There was already all this worry in the past. That summer, there had been a bunch of companies that collapsed, and people had never thought FTX. It was kind of the first time anyone thought FTX could maybe not have the money. Where's the money? I don't know. But he controls everything. And so it's like this is the tactic of these offshore companies is you put the account fiat at FTX. And so what prosecutors are now arguing is he knew, of course, what it was. He deliberately obscurity. They have to say what they have, where they're putting their money. They're subject to more regulation about how they take care of customer deposits. One of the big things with FTX was they told people, hey, you put your money with us, we're not going to touch it, we're not going to move it. That's what FTX this thing. So all this money's going in, and then you basically wait. And as you're waiting, Ethereum's going out everywhere. A bunch of people are withdrawing, right? Because they're also taking their money out.
Right.
By the time the house always wins, right? So when FTX was taking off, it just seemed like everyone who was someone was backing him. So then it was okay. And then I think a lot of these people deferred.
It was 70,000 or something like
60
that.
60 plus, yeah.
So that's the lure. The lure is you buy in for pennies, and one day you're insanely rich. I'm sure you know about that.
Not actually this incredible business that you thought it was, that you're going to get rich easily. So don't do that. Go do crypto. You got to get into crypto now. And then it became in the terms of service, they said results may vary. What's that about? Mm-hmm. I mean, ultimately, it's and so I realized, there's this sophisticated way that they're preying on my psychology, and then from the arms of one huckster to another, it's almost to something worse. There were some margin trading accounts, and I'm like, no, but there were people who didn't trade with margin. There were people who just put their money with you. And they wanted, or you were a grandma who just put one Bitcoin on there, or, more likely the grandson. He treated all the accounts the same. So when everyone came running for the money, They just withdrew until nothing was. The CEO as of 2020. He hands it to this a girl he actually had a relationship with, Caroline Ellison, right? And she supposedly controlled it. He said she did how you're going to make some money. And so people invested in FTX thinking that this is going to be a safe platform. This kid is smarter than everyone else.
How does a guy like that not wind up getting indicted?
I ask myself that every day. There's so many.
Is it a matter of time, or is it
victims would reach out to me? They'd be like, "Hey, I'd been scammed by this guy, and I didn't realize what was going on. And you showed me, sort of like how the whole scheme worked." Around, right? Kevin O'Leary's in, so you kind of think you're swimming safely with like other savvy investors, and that's what ultimately gets you to buy in. Bernie Madoff is very similar. Something, because I was just like, why does this make some people tens of millions of dollars and nothing happens? Why? You can watch them. These are real people, Joe. You can be just like them. And so I started watching this, and I started like seeing it. I'm like, oh my gosh, this is so interesting. Kept making the videos, and ultimately they never did. But I start doing that, and after I cover get rich quick schemes for a while, stuff, you're just having to trust these shady offshore entities that they're telling the truth. Binance says they're fine. They show proof of reserves, but what are their liabilities? Is buying both